I knew the end was coming, not because of the quarterly numbers or the whispers in the break room, but because Ashley, our new chief operating officer, had replaced the industrial coffee machine with some kombucha tap that smelled like fermented gym socks. My name is Ryan Kowalski. I'm 47 years old, and for the last 14 years I've been the Senior Environmental Compliance Manager at Midwest Metal Fabrication. That's a fancy way of saying I'm the only person standing between a rusting, chemical-belching factory and a federal indictment that would make Chernobyl look like a minor parking violation. I know every pipe, every permit, and every skeleton buried under the foundation. Metaphorically speaking, and given the safety record before I got here, almost literally too. Back in 2010, I found 3 unmarked drums behind Building C that turned out to be chromium waste from the 1990s. Took me 6 months and $80,000 in remediation costs to clean that up without triggering an EPA investigation. That's the kind of work Ashley Reed thinks she can hand over to consultants. The summons to Ashley's office came at 9:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. The email subject line read, "Operational Synergy Meeting." It might as well have said, "Bring a box for your stuff." I walked into what used to be her Uncle Kevin's office. Kevin Reed founded this place 30 years ago, built it from nothing into a $50 million operation, making brake components for Ford. The office used to smell like old leather, cigar smoke, and honest work. You could feel the history in those walls, the late nights Kevin spent here during the recession, the handshake deals that saved the company, the pride of building something that lasted. Now it looked like an Apple store had an orgy with a WeWork. Everything was glass and brushed aluminum, sterile as a hospital. The leather chairs where Kevin made million-dollar decisions were gone, replaced by these geometric things that looked like modern art pretending to be furniture. Ashley was sitting behind a desk that cost more than my truck, sipping something green that probably cost $8 at Starbucks. She wasn't wearing real shoes, just those little slip-on things that I assume are the uniform for people who've never done physical labor in their lives. Her MBA from some private college was framed on the wall like a trophy, right where Kevin's first EPA compliance certificate used to hang. "Ryan, take a seat," she said, gesturing to a chair that looked like a torture device designed by IKEA. "We're doing some strategic pivoting today." "Pivoting?" I repeated. My voice was flat. "I don't do corporate speak. I do EPA audits and hazardous waste manifests. I speak the language of regulations written in blood and money." "Exactly. Look, Ryan, we value your legacy here, but we're moving toward a more agile, cloud-native approach to compliance. We need digital natives, fresh perspectives on regulatory frameworks." I blinked slowly. This woman had been here 6 months and thought she could revolutionize an industry she didn't understand. "Ashley, the EPA isn't cloud native. They're federal agents with clipboards and guns who measure parts per million of chromium in our brake coating process. I built this compliance system from scratch over 14 years. It's not an app you download from the company store." She smiled, that condescending smile you see on people who think an MBA makes them smarter than experience. "We've hired Green Tech Solutions as our compliance consultancy. They specialize in automated regulatory workflows. They're going to optimize your processes while we restructure your position." The corporate doublespeak was making my head hurt. "Restructure my position? Unfortunately, we're going to have to let you go, effective immediately." There it was. After 14 years of keeping this place legal, 14 years of dodging million-dollar fines, 14 years of being the guy they called at 3 a.m. when something went wrong, I was being dismissed by a 28-year-old who probably thought OSHA was a yoga pose. I stared at her while the hum of Building 2's thermal oxidizer reached my ears through the glass walls. I knew that sound better than my own heartbeat. I knew it was running slightly hot because the afternoon shift always cranked the temperature to meet quotas. I knew the temperature sensor drifted 2% high every month and needed manual calibration. I knew that if someone didn't adjust for that drift, we'd either be reporting false violations or lying to the federal government. I knew all of this. Ashley didn't know any of it. "You're firing me," I said, just to cut through the corporate nonsense. "We're right-sizing the organization," she corrected, tapping her Apple Pencil on that ridiculous desk. "Optimizing human capital allocation. If you could just hand over your badge and laptop, security is outside to help you collect your personal effects." Let me pause here for a second. If you're enjoying watching a 28-year-old MBA destroy a multi-million-dollar company in real time, stick around. This gets interesting real fast. Ashley, I said, standing up slowly. I felt that familiar calm settling over me. The same calm I'd felt in 2018 when I discovered a leak in the chromium storage tank and had to coordinate an emergency response while the plant manager hyperventilated. Just so we're crystal clear, you're terminating my access, confiscating my equipment, and informing me that my services are no longer required. That's essentially correct, yes. Please sign here for your severance package. 3 weeks pay, which is quite generous considering the circumstances. 3 weeks. For 14 years of institutional knowledge. 14 years of relationships with every EPA inspector in the region. 14 years of building a compliance program that had kept us violation-free since 2015. 3 weeks and a smile from someone who probably couldn't find the chromium tanks with a GPS and a guided tour. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger would come later. Right now, I was calculating. Okay, I said, reaching into my pocket. I pulled out my badge, worn smooth from 14 years of daily use, the magnetic strips scratched from countless swipes through security doors I'd helped design the protocols for. I placed it on her glass desk with a distinct click that seemed to echo in the sterile room. Then I set my laptop next to it, the company-issued Dell that contained my email and basic file access, but not much else. Passwords on a sticky note under the keyboard. But Ashley, the compliance system isn't just files on a computer drive. We've got it covered, Ryan, she said, waving dismissively while already looking at her phone, probably checking LinkedIn or Instagram, maybe researching her next disruptive innovation. The Green Tech team comes highly recommended. They've automated compliance for 3 other manufacturing firms. None in our industry, I said quietly. None dealing with chromium coating processes. Regulatory frameworks are fundamentally similar across sectors, she replied, using that confident tone that only comes from never having been catastrophically wrong about something important. I almost smiled, almost warned her. But the part of me that had spent 14 years fixing other people's problems was finally tired. Let someone else be the adult in the room for a change. Don't take it personally, Ryan, Ashley added, as if I was some middle manager upset about losing a corner office. Personally? No, I wasn't taking it personally. I was taking it professionally. There's a difference. I walked out of that office with Logan, our security guard, trailing behind me. Poor Logan had been here almost as long as I had. We'd shared thousands of early morning conversations over coffee, talked about his grandkids, complained about management decisions that made our jobs harder. He knew this was wrong. I'm sorry, Ryan, Logan muttered as we reached my office to collect my personal items. This ain't right. Everyone knows you're the reason we haven't had a major violation in years. Don't worry about it, Logan, I said, packing my coffee mug and the picture of my late wife Sarah into a cardboard box. Just do me a favor. Tomorrow morning around 8 a.m., maybe take a long coffee break. Away from Building 2. Why? What's happening at 8 a.m.? I looked around my office one last time. The wall covered in compliance certificates, EPA correspondence, sensor calibration charts that I'd updated by hand every week for over a decade. 14 years of institutional knowledge that Ashley thought could be replaced by a consulting firm with PowerPoint presentations. The future coming to collect, I said. Or the past catching up. One of the two. Logan walked me to the front gate, both of us quiet. When we reached the parking lot, I lit a cigarette, a habit I'd picked up during the stress of the 2019 chromium leak incident and never quite shook. Take care of yourself, Logan, I said, and when the dust settles, give me a call. I might know about some opportunities. See, Ashley had made one critical mistake in her operational efficiency analysis. She assumed compliance was a department you could outsource, like janitorial services or IT support. But compliance at a facility like ours isn't a department. It's a living, breathing system that requires someone who understands not just the regulations, but the quirks of 30-year-old equipment and the personalities of federal inspectors who've been on the job since the Clinton administration. More importantly, she assumed the automated reporting system I'd built was company property that she could just hand over to consultants like a set of keys. It wasn't. The EPA requires continuous emissions monitoring for facilities like ours. Since our hardware was installed during the first Bush administration, it couldn't communicate directly with modern internet protocols. So over the years, I'd built what I called a translation system, a network of Python scripts running on cloud servers that took data from our ancient sensors, applied the necessary calibration corrections, and uploaded clean reports to the EPA database every morning. The beautiful part was where those cloud servers lived. Back in 2017, I'd submitted a budget request for a proper cloud infrastructure through corporate IT. The request sat in approval limbo for 4 months while EPA deadlines kept coming. So I did what any compliance manager worth his salary does. I fixed the problem myself. I set up an Azure Cloud account under my name, using my personal credit card, and built the system we needed. Every month, I submitted an expense report for the cloud hosting costs. Kevin always approved them without question, because the system worked flawlessly and kept us out of trouble. But the Azure account itself, the administrative access, the encryption keys, those were mine. Paid for by my credit card, registered under my name, protected by my personal authentication credentials. Ashley had fired me and confiscated my company laptop, but she never asked about cloud account passwords. She didn't even know the cloud system existed. I got into my 2018 Ford F-150, engine rattling slightly because I'd been meaning to fix that motor mount for 6 months, and sat there for a moment looking back at the facility. Through the windows of the administrative building, I could see Ashley moving around her office like she was already celebrating. She probably thought she'd just saved $95,000 a year in salary while modernizing operations. She had no idea she'd just pulled the pin on a very expensive grenade. I started the truck and drove home, classic rock station playing something by Foreigner. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 14 years of being the guy who prevented disasters, I was about to become one. The system I'd built included what programmers call a dead man's switch, a fail-safe that requires regular confirmation that everything is operating normally. Every 24 hours, the system expected me to log in and verify that the sensor readings were accurate, that calibrations were current, and that the data being sent to EPA was correct. If I didn't provide that confirmation by 7:52 a.m., the system would assume something was wrong and default to what I'd programmed as transparency mode. Instead of sending carefully calibrated, corrected data to the EPA, it would send everything. Raw sensor readings, error messages, fault codes, all the messy reality that normally gets cleaned up before federal agencies see it. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd already decided. Tomorrow morning, for the first time in 14 years, I wasn't going to log in and approve the daily report. Tomorrow morning, the EPA was going to see exactly what Midwest metal fabrication looked like without Ryan Kowalski keeping the lights on. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a glass of bourbon and my personal MacBook open on the table. The kitchen is like me, functional, clean, and built to last. Sarah had picked out the appliances before she passed 3 years ago, and I'd kept everything exactly the way she'd wanted it. She always said the kitchen was the heart of a home, and even now it felt like the most honest room in the house. I logged into my Azure account and pulled up the monitoring dashboard. Green lights flickered across the screen like the vital signs of a living organism. Temperature readings, pH levels, chromium concentrations, airflow rates. All the data points that kept Midwest Metal legal and profitable. Without my daily calibration reviews, the numbers were already starting to drift into interesting territory. The thermal oxidizer in Building 2 was reading 1,485 degrees Fahrenheit. Our permit allowed a maximum of 1,400. Not catastrophic yet, but definitely a violation if reported to EPA without context. The pH monitor in our wastewater treatment system showed 9.4, basic enough to strip paint off a car. Another violation. And the crown jewel, the chromium emissions sensor in the coating bay was displaying sensor fault, signal interrupted. Under normal circumstances, I would investigate the fault, probably find a loose connection or a bird's nest in the housing, fix it, and manually enter corrected data based on historical patterns. Without my intervention, EPA emergency protocols would kick in. When a monitoring system can't verify what's being released, federal regulations assume the worst-case scenario until proven otherwise. Tomorrow morning, my automated system would essentially tell the government, "We have no idea what we're pumping into the air, so you should assume it's pure poison." I checked the clock. 9:30 p.m. In about 10 hours, Ashley would arrive at her glass office, probably with her $8 green smoothie, completely unaware that her operational efficiency improvements were about to trigger a federal emergency response. I almost called her. For about 30 seconds, I seriously considered picking up the phone and explaining what was about to happen. Professional courtesy, you might say. Then I remembered the kombucha machine and her dismissive wave, and I closed the laptop instead. I slept better than I had in months. Wednesday morning, my alarm went off at 6:30 out of habit. For the first time in 14 years, I didn't have to rush through breakfast to beat traffic to the plant. Instead, I made real coffee with my French press and sat on the back porch, watching birds argue over the feeder Sarah had installed. At 7:45 a.m., I opened my laptop one final time. The system was counting down to its scheduled 7:52 a.m. transmission to the EPA database. A simple authentication prompt waited for my password, the same prompt I'd answered every morning for years. Status, pre-flight check initiated. Connection, active. Target, EPA Region 5 submission portal. User authentication, pending. One keystroke would stop the process. One password entry would let me review the data, apply corrections, and send EPA the clean, compliant report they expected. The same report that had kept Midwest Metal violation-free for years. Instead, I closed the laptop and refilled my coffee mug. At 7:52 a.m. sharp, my system did exactly what it was programmed to do when the human oversight failed. It gathered every raw data point from every sensor in the facility and transmitted it directly to the federal database with a cover note that read, "Automated transmission, no human verification. System administrator unavailable." The legal equivalent of walking into EPA headquarters and confessing to crimes you didn't commit. My phone started buzzing at 8:45 a.m. Melissa from accounting. Something's wrong. Ashley keeps running between her office and the conference room. Looks like she's seen a ghost. 8:50 a.m. Logan. Two black SUVs just pulled through the front gate. Federal plates. They didn't stop for badge checks, just flashed credentials and drove straight to the main building. I smiled. The EPA emergency response team doesn't make appointments. 8:55 a.m. Melissa again. OMG, Ryan, what did you do? Men in blue windbreakers everywhere. Ashley screaming at the green tech consultants. This is chaos. Based on my years of experience with federal enforcement procedures, here's exactly what was happening. Agent Preston from EPA Region 5 was standing in Ashley's pristine lobby, reading from a tablet that showed Midwest Metal had just reported massive environmental violations across multiple systems. Ma'am, we received critical exceedance alerts at 7:52 a.m. indicating uncontrolled chromium emissions, pH violations in wastewater discharge, and thermal oxidizer malfunctions. Where is your senior environmental compliance manager? Well, Ryan Kowalski is no longer with the organization. We restructured our compliance operations yesterday for better efficiency. You fired your compliance officer and didn't ensure continuity of EPA reporting requirements. We have consultants coming to automate the processes. Green Tech Solutions. They're digital transformation specialists. Ma'am, I don't care if you hired NASA. Your facility just reported that you're dumping caustic chemicals into municipal water systems and releasing uncontrolled heavy metals into the air. We're implementing an immediate cease and desist order under Emergency Authority Section 7003. The shutdown order is the nuclear option in environmental enforcement. It means cut power to all manufacturing operations, isolate chemical storage systems, evacuate non-essential personnel. Every minute of downtime costs roughly $3,800 in lost production, and that's before you factor in contract penalties and reputation damage. 9:15 a.m. Logan. They're putting yellow tape around the coating bay, taking samples of everything. Ashley trying to call someone on her phone but looks like she's getting voicemail. She was probably trying to reach her Uncle Kevin, who was enjoying retirement on a golf course in Florida, blissfully unaware that his niece had just turned his life's work into a federal crime scene. Meanwhile, I finished my coffee and decided to do some laundry. The mundane nature of my morning felt surreal against the backdrop of the chaos I'd unleashed by simply not doing my job for the first time in 14 years. By 10 a.m., the facility had been completely shut down. Estimated cost, $1.37 million in lost production for the first day alone, plus EPA fines starting at $25,000 per day per violation, plus breach of contract penalties with Ford Motor Company when their brake rotor shipments failed to arrive. Ashley had thought she was saving $95,000 a year by eliminating my position. Instead, she'd created $1 million disaster in less than 12 hours. And the beautiful part? I was the only person who could fix it. At 10:30 a.m., my phone rang. Chicago area code, EPA Region 5. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to Agent Preston's message. Mr. Kowalski, we're on site at Midwest Metal Fabrication. Current management can't access historical calibration records or explain the system failures. We need to speak with you immediately. I didn't call back. As of yesterday, I was a private citizen with no legal obligation to help EPA or anyone else. The second call came from Midwest's main number. Ashley, of course. I watched it ring 4 times before answering. Ryan, thank God. Her voice was an octave higher than usual, strained with panic. There's been a massive misunderstanding. EPA is here, they're shutting everything down. They're saying our system reported major violations, but that's impossible. It has to be sensor malfunctions. It is, I said calmly. Thermal oxidizer sensor drift, pH calibration error, and a faulty connection on the chromium monitor. Standard maintenance issues. Exactly. So you can just log in remotely and fix the readings, right? Send corrected data to EPA? I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. Ashley, I can't do that. Why not? I'll pay you. Full consultant rate for emergency service. Because accessing corporate systems after termination would violate federal computer fraud laws. That would be illegal hacking. You wouldn't want me to commit a felony, would you? Ryan, please. The professional mask cracked completely. They've stopped all production. We're losing thousands of dollars every minute. That sounds like a management problem, I said. Maybe your green tech consultants can disrupt their way out of it. Ryan, stop playing games. You sabotaged us. I didn't sabotage anything, Ashley. I did exactly nothing. You fired the pilot mid-flight and you're surprised the plane is crashing. I hung up and blocked her number, but I knew the corporate panic protocol. She'd escalate to HR, then legal, then finally they'd come crawling back with real money. I opened Microsoft Word and created a document titled Emergency Compliance Remediation Proposal. Under the fee structure, I typed $1,800,000, 18 times my annual salary. The number felt right, expensive enough to hurt, but not so outrageous they'd refuse. By noon, Melissa was sending me updates that read like disaster reports. Ford called asking about delayed shipments. Loading dock blocked by federal investigators. Ashley locked in conference room with lawyers. At 1:30 p.m., my email chimed. Nicole from HR. Ryan, you may be withholding company passwords and system access. Per your employment contract, all intellectual property belongs to Midwest Metal. We require immediate provision of administrative credentials. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I replied within minutes. Nicole, I returned all company property yesterday. The cloud system you're referring to runs on my personal Azure account, paid for with my personal credit card since 2017. See attached budget request that was denied by IT. This is not company property. It's a third-party service provider. That provider happens to be me. I'm open to discussing ownership transfer, but my schedule is currently full. Best regards, Ryan. The attached emails from 2017 showed corporate IT telling me cloud servers were unnecessary overhead and Excel spreadsheets were perfectly adequate for compliance tracking. Documentation. I'd always been good at keeping records. At 3 p.m., Brandon from legal called. His voice sounded like a man trying to negotiate his way out of quicksand. Ryan, we've reviewed the Azure situation. You're technically correct. The hosting infrastructure is yours. Not technically, Brandon. Actually, what's it going to take to resolve this? Ashley, the situation is becoming untenable. I have a proposal ready. Sending it now. I attached my PDF and waited. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly a minute. Ryan, this is $1.8 million it is. This is extortion. No, Brandon. Extortion is demanding payment for nothing. This is a consulting fee for specialized expertise required to save a $50 million company from permanent EPA sanctions. If they revoke our operating permits, what's the facility worth? Scrap metal prices. I can't authorize this amount. Then call Kevin in Florida. Interrupt his golf game. Tell him his niece just drove the family business off a cliff and I'm the only tow truck in the state. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Florida area code. Kevin Reed himself. Ryan. His voice sounded like gravel being chewed. What the hell happened up there? Ashley fired me yesterday without transition planning, Kevin. The EPA reporting system defaulted to emergency protocols this morning. The girl's a disaster, he growled. I knew giving her operational control was a mistake. She thinks running a factory is like managing a startup. She's definitely disrupting traditional business models, I said. She says you want $1.8 million to fix this mess. That's the consulting fee for emergency remediation services, yes. EPA fines alone will cost more than that if this drags out. Ford's already asking questions about contract compliance. Long pause. I could hear wind through his phone, probably standing on a fairway, watching his life's work burn from 1,000 miles away. If I pay it, can you actually fix this? I have all the historical calibration data needed to prove these were sensor malfunctions, not actual violations. I can file corrected reports with EPA, walk Agent Preston through the documentation, and have the shutdown order lifted by tomorrow afternoon. And Ashley, your family situation isn't my problem, Kevin. But if I come back, she doesn't speak to me, look at me, or breathe in my general direction. Professional courtesy only. Kevin barked a short laugh. Done. You're a shark, Ryan. I should have listened to you years ago about bringing in family. The DocuSign contract arrived at 6 p.m. Payment of $1,800,000 upon execution, with funds held in third-party escrow. I signed it and watched the progress bar complete. By 7 p.m., the money was confirmed in escrow. I put on my work boots and drove back to the plant for the first time as a highly paid consultant instead of a taken-for-granted employee. Ashley was waiting in the lobby, looking like she'd aged a decade in 24 hours. When she saw me walk in, her face cycled through relief, anger, and resignation. You really did it, she said quietly. You actually held the company hostage. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since this started. She wasn't evil, just young and arrogant and completely out of her depth. In a different world, I might have felt sorry for her. Ashley, I said, I didn't hold anything hostage. I charged you a stupidity tax. Consider it tuition for an education in how the real world works. I spent the next 3 hours in the conference room with Agent Preston, walking him through years of sensor data and calibration records. By 10 p.m., the EPA was satisfied that no actual environmental violations had occurred. Ashley was fired the next morning. Kevin handled it personally over the phone from Florida. 6 months later, I'm sitting on the dock of my lake house in northern Michigan, watching the sunset paint the water golden red. The $1.8 million bought me a comfortable early retirement and enough investment income to never worry about money again. My phone buzzes with a LinkedIn notification. Ashley is still seeking new opportunities in sustainable business development. Her wellness app startup failed after 3 months. I deleted LinkedIn and went back to watching the sunset. Some stories end with forgiveness and redemption. This one ends with a man finally learning to value himself the way he'd spent 14 years valuing everyone else. The kombucha machine is probably still sitting in that break room, dispensing fermented disappointment to whoever's left. But that's not my problem anymore. I'm Ryan Kowalski. I used to fix other people's problems. Finally, I fixed my own.